Normally when I'm choosing a new game to speedrun, I have a few rules. It has to be something that I've played a lot before. This just gives me a better starting off point and it gives me a general idea of what the speedrun is going to be like before I attempt it. It also has to be something that people would enjoy watching. It is my job to entertain after all. And it has to be on PC, because I don't own any consoles. But what of the countless games that are stuck on consoles, never to get a PC release? Many of those games fall under the other categories of games I would run, but don't have the good fortune of making it onto the personal computer. This is especially the case for older games. The PlayStation 2, GameCube, and OG Xbox generation has countless gems that have been left behind. Not every game is as timelessly revered as Halo or Call of Duty and gets HD re-releases on PC. One of my favorite childhood games is a little-known GoldenEye clone by the name of TimeSplitters Future Perfect. Basically, you play as Vin Diesel and Jason Statham's love child named Cortez. He's a sergeant in the future military and is tasked with the mission of time traveling around past, present, and future in an attempt to stop the creation of the ultimate hunting creatures. The wait for it, TimeSplitters. Yes, I know, very corny, but that's actually the point. In his journey through the 1800s, the 1969s, and the future, Cortez groups up with an array of hilarious characters such as the legendary Harry Tipper, spy sex icon extraordinaire.
Word is, Cal has given him a small army in exchange for, get this, eternal life. Eternal life? Yeah.
Joe Beth, the dim-witted goth girl.
Hey, you're no zombie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And R110, the hijacked robot that develops a bloodthirsty personality after contracting a virus from hacking open a few doors.
You all know your target?
We'll see about that.
Death to Cortez! Death to Cortez! Death to Cortez!
I think you better stay here.
The game is littered with movie references, dirty jokes, and fun classic FPS gameplay. Unfortunately, this masterpiece of a game, for whatever reason, never got a PC release. Just because this is the case does not mean we PC gamers are out of options though. This is where emulation comes into play. Emulation is where you use computer software to artificially recreate the hardware of a gaming console. This way you can play older games that never released on PC on a PC. You can acquire the games in very legal ways for said consoles and play them like this. This is a great way to preserve games that are old and never get updated. One day, when the official hardware is failing and the discs are nowhere to be found, you can always still emulate them. There's one problem though. Normally, speedruns don't allow the use of emulators. But why is that? You see, emulators are imperfect. Depending on the emulator, it can vary from vastly inaccurate with physics bugs and run speed variation to near perfect emulation, even with rollback multiplayer netplay support. Even on the best emulators though, some games aren't perfectly emulated either. It's really just a case-by-case basis on if the game itself is in an emulated state accurate enough to be competitive with traditional hardware. For those games who are lucky enough to have an emulator accurate enough to be competitive with real hardware, they start to benefit in other alternative methods too. One of my favorites though is modding. Once you have a stable version of the game, the obvious next step is to break shit, like your Limp Bizkit. Speedrunners don't normally mess around with mods as they don't have much support for competition or competitive rule sets, but some mods are more suitable for this than others. This is where emulation can solve a problem for me. Another one of my rules of speedrunning games is that because I'm a PC gamer elitist that shall not cast my pearls before the swine that is the abomination people call a GameCube controller, I refuse to speedrun first or third person shooters on a controller. Mouse and keyboard is just such a better solution for such games and makes them much more enjoyable to play for me, as well as getting rid of the soft aim hack that is auto aim. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with speedrunning on a controller, I'm just kidding, but for it to be fun for me, I need to be using a keyboard and mouse as God intended. Thankfully, there is a mod for TimeSplitters that does just this. The mouse injection mod allows for the use of near native mouse and keyboard controls for TimeSplitters 1, 2, and Future Perfect on Dolphin Emulator. Using this mod, I was able to play the game in 1440p with perfect mouse and keyboard controls in the year 2022. It was phenomenal, and I knew right then that I wanted to speedrun this game, even if I needed to start a revolution to do it. The TimeSplitters speedrunning community is actually pretty forward-thinking. The Speedrun.com page actually allows for emulators in speedruns already. Huzzah! They do not allow for the use of the keyboard and mouse mod though, however. The reasoning for this is pretty simple. Keyboard and mouse has legitimate advantages over controller. So much so that you could, in theory, perform strategies that are only possible on keyboard and mouse that would make runs practically unbeatable on the original hardware that the game was released on. This is why the best solution is to create a brand new category, one that just allows the use of mouse and keyboard injection during the run. There's one problem, however. Who's gonna run it? I mean, I will, or at least I say I will, but will I really? When it comes to speedrunning, there is a lot of talk and not very much do, especially when it comes down to creating new categories. People will whine and complain and beg for new categories to be made all day, but when you make them, no one runs them. This is why moderators of some games have come up with certain rules that they do or don't add new categories from, mostly focused on actual demand. In order to make the category, for some, people have to run the category. However, most people won't actually run a category unless it's an official one. This creates a bit of a catch-22. Who is going to run the category enough to make it official? And if it's never made official, will anyone else ever run it? The longer I have been speedrunning, the more I have realized that the leaderboards, while integral and very cool, is not everything. And if I think a run would be fun, I should just fucking do it. So that's what I set out to do. Be the change I wanted to see in the world. So I did. I said, fuck the leaderboard, fuck submitting a run. If I wanted the runs to be official, I just had to do the runs myself and make them good, and convince enough people to run it with me that we could make it an actual category. So I started learning the run. I watched Lapogna's world record and learned what I could by going level by level. The spawns are probably always the same if I had to guess. I'm curious I don't know why you reload checkpoint. One of the TimeSplitters runners in the chat, do you know why you reload checkpoint at the beginning of this fight? It took me about 6 hours to learn the game. It's really short, maybe about an hour and 30 minutes for a first run. The world record is about an hour and 11 minutes long. Structurally, the game is broken into 13 levels. The first, Time to Split, then Scotland the Brave, Russian Connection, Callous Express, Mansion of Madness, What Lies Below, Breaking and Entering, Eugenius, Eugenics, Machine Wars, Something to Crow About, You Take the High Road, The Hooded Man, and finally, Future Perfect. The most important thing when learning a completely new game is to watch a full game run and then just see what you can imitate. TimeSplitters Future Perfect in particular is a very simple and straightforward speedrun for the most part. It doesn't have any huge crazy skips, but it does certainly have its moments. I wouldn't be able to learn all of the intricacies on my first attempt, but that's not what I needed to do. I just needed to be familiar enough with the game to be able to complete it somewhat quickly. I started in order, obviously, with the first level. It's Time to Split. This is one of the most straightforward levels. It's basically a hallway with enemies in it and a required combat counter at the end. The final combat has 2 stages. The first one where you shoot a turret to kill some time splitters. Once you kill enough, the door opens to the next section where Cortez has to kill another few time splitters before being allowed to enter into the end level trigger inside the building. Once inside this building, you meet up with Anya and time travel back to when people used to live in Scotland. The poor bastards. Scotland is a fairly straightforward level, where Cortez and Captain Ash team up to take on the big bad and save the girl. This is where we are first introduced to the driving mechanics in the game. And if you've been watching the 10,000 speedrun dollars challenge amok runner shenanigans that Moist Man has been hosting, then you would know that programming vehicles is a lot harder than you might think. While not quite as broken as the cars in that game, the cars in this game can also be used to do a few cool tricks. When parking along the edge of a load zone about halfway through the level, you can get into the car from one side of the load zone and it'll put you inside the other. This skips the game from actually loading the next area, causing what is called a deload. The deload basically makes it so the game doesn't load any of the textures or doors in the level. It's near impossible to see where you're going, but you can use the minimap on Cortez's arm to look where you're going. Now that the level is deloaded, you can be able to head right to the end of the level, completing it instantly. Well, you would be able to if you didn't have to hit every trigger in the level. In order to actually get the level to end, you have to one by one in order hit the triggers that you normally would hit when playing the game normally. However, you can skip most of the level by walking through the walls to hit the triggers. Some of the triggers are these big blue circles on the minimap, and others are just invisible, and you have to memorize where they are. After hitting all of them, you can then reload checkpoint and spawn in the tank boss fight and blow it to smithereens, finishing the level. This is actually the first thing I ever saw done in a TimeSplitters speedrun. In fact, the first run I ever watched live was the world record by Lapogna. I was here! After that, there's a stealth level, Russian Connection, where you escort Harry Tipper through a secret Russian base, and then Callous Express, where you run from the back to the front of a train, going at approximately light speed. Finally, it's time to split! And you time travel to 1996, and into the Spencer Mansion with goth girl Jo Beth. Here you fight zombies, ghosts, worms, and cows? Then you have to head down into a secret lab underneath the mansion, because of course you do.
You go first.
Okay.
And meet up with your future self who has a ghost gun. After that, we chase the big bad scientist Crow into the future, where we see the developers flex their Future Dark experience with the worst levels in the game. An office building that leads into another secret lab, this time full of mutants and robots. After a few puzzles, we then travel even further into the future, and not just in games, also in mechanics. This game must have foresaw what was going to happen in the 2010s to games like RE5 and Gears of War 2, because there are a ton of vehicle and turret sections in this level. Machine Wars is everything what's wrong with 2010's game design. Finally, we head into something to crow about, where you fight through waves of robots and the hardest boss in the game. If you skip the cutscene right where his foot is in the air, he spawns in with 0 HP and you can kill him in one shot. Small oversight there. This is when we take the fight to the past and try to stop Crow from creating the Time Splitters. We head into Bioshock with our robot friend and harpoon our way to glory through a really straightforward level. Then the levels get anything but straightforward as we time travel back to the future and play the first level again, but this time from the perspective of ourselves, protecting our past self. Apparently I didn't actually kill any of those enemies in the first mission. Well, I did, just not like... Well, time travel's confusing, okay? Anyways, we babysit past Cortez through the level and make sure he gets home safe before 10 PM, otherwise his dad'll kill me. Back to the past, we enter the final level, Future Perfect, where we destroy the time crystals and fight Future Crow for one last time. No cutscene skip abuse this time though. After this simple boss fight, the run is over in about an hour and a half for my first attempt. The run is really straightforward and simple. It has some cool details though. The skip on Scotland is a nice addition, and with a little practice, it could easily come down to closer to 1 hour rather than an hour and a half. There was one thing I really wanted to mess with though. The individual level speedrun for What Lies Below was about 4.5 minutes faster than the full game version. This is because of a skip called Box Skip, or What Lies Below Skip, or Big Ass Skip as I would call it, thanks to Joe Beth's dialogue. Basically, right at the start of the level, there is a drop down. This puts you into the actual start of the level where the combat is and you save Joe Beth. But you can push these boxes into the wall in a specific way that uses them to buffer your movement speed. You can then get around the corner of the pillar and far enough away from the hole that the game pulls you down that you can teleport down there instead of being sucked down there. This happens to the player, and even in some circumstances enemies, if they can't get a direct line to where they're supposed to fall to. Once teleported, you can spawn in at one of 11 locations. At the time, which locations seemed to be entirely random. But one of those locations had a bug that if you spawned in it, the level would be deloaded. This acts just like the deload on Scotland. If you hit that teleport spot, then you can use the minimap to set up the next part of the skip. You walk backwards off the stairs and fall out of bounds into the princess boss fight right at the end of the level. That means that it could be as low as a 104.20. No one had ever done this trick in an actual full game run before, only individual level runs. This told me that the trick was either completely random or just insanely difficult. Either way, I intended to find out why. I spent the first few hours of my practice with this skip. I practiced for about 2 hours and was only able to get the trick about 3 or 4 times. I was learning more and more about it though. I got a somewhat consistent lineup and I was pretty sure it wasn't random. If I got the teleport, it was most of the time to the right spot I needed to teleport to. And if I got the correct teleport, then I could always get the second half of the trick, because it was really easy. While my success rate for the trick was probably only about 40%, it still seemed more viable to do in a full game run considering it saved 4.5 minutes. I mean, I could try the trick from start of the level 3 or 4 times, and it would still be faster than doing the level normally. This is where I did my first few speedruns. I didn't practice anything except for What Lies Below skip, and I just tried to improve upon what I did in my first run. On my second run, I obviously improved a ton. I saved a ton of time on Scotland by doing the out of bounds quickly, and the mansion was a lot better than last time. I YOLO'd What Lies Below skip, and I actually hit it. First try. I became the first person to ever do this trick in a full game run on my second ever attempt. Oh my god. Let's fucking go, dude! This is when I decided that I was gonna go for this trick every single run. It didn't seem as hard as it was made out to be. This put me a whole 8 minutes ahead at the 40-minute mark, putting me on pace for a 130 flat with plenty of more time to save in the late game. I lost about a minute to breaking and entering, to some bad combat and lack of understanding on the level, but I would gain this back in the next couple of levels. I was then 13 minutes ahead going into the final level. It's also important to note that I started speeding up the emulator during load screens, just to make the run faster for me in real time. but this would not affect the game's in-game timer, which is what is normally used to rank speedruns on the leaderboard. The load screens don't count on speedruns normally, so speeding them up is not a problem. We didn't have a plugin for LiveSplit to read the in-game timer yet, so this time save that I was getting on the faster loads was going to be represented on my splits, even though it didn't really matter in the end. Even with those sped up load screens though, they were actually nowhere near as fast as the Xbox Series S loads or even Xbox One. In the final level, I couldn't actually look at the center of the room without the emulator dropping a ton of frames. For whatever reason, the time crystal on this version of the emulator causes the game to lag here. The in-game timer also slows down with the game's frame rate, so the game running slower during these sections doesn't actually lose you any time, but it is really annoying. For some reason, the shit in the middle of this room causes the emulator to drop like 1.5 bajillion frames, so. I finished my second run ever with a 1:19.15, 11 minutes from the world record, and the first run ever with what lies below skip. I would do yet another run this time, remembering where to go and learning what enemies I actually needed to kill and what ones I did not. I got what lies below skip again first try, and this led me to getting another 5.5 minute PB, leaving me with a 1:13.37. Nice. A really good time, only 5 minutes from the world record. For my third run, this was insane progress. I tried to do a few more runs, but this is when something bad started happening. In the meantime, I had taken 2 days off and now my mojo was gone. I could not hit what lies below skip. I practiced for a few hours and only hit it a handful of times, when just days prior, I hit it first try 3 runs back to back. I was determined to figure out what caused the skip to work. Thankfully, the speedrunning community for this game at this point had found me and was helping me with the trick and my runs. People like Spoyer, Redacted, Ben Killer, Fouch, and others. Some members of the Left 4 Dead 2 speedrunning community also were helping me create tools to help test the game. Specifically Loki, Darut, Patrick, and Killer. This is where the emulator can help immensely. Using Dolphin Memory Reader, a third-party tool to read memory values of the emulated game, we were able to find the X, Y, and Z position values of Cortez. This lets us eliminate a few variables when trying to figure out how the trick works exactly. Just like any scientific process, eliminating variables helps to isolate the factors that are causing certain actions to happen. By knowing the exact position value, we were able to determine that your position when you teleport is actually always the same, even if you get teleported to different positions every time. So with positions marked off, the next thing to test was looking for any sort of consistency. This is where save states would help a ton. Save states are a special thing that only emulators can do. They're kind of like quick saves in some PC games, but it saves the entirety of the game's state. Every background process, every single factor is saved. This can also be reverted to. By making save states right before teleporting, then triggering the teleport the same way over and over again, we could test to see if different teleports with the exact same process would happen. If we did get different teleports, that would mean that the game randomly decides where to teleport you. But fortunately for us, when we did this process, we would get the exact same teleport every single time. So it is skill-based for sure. We just didn't know what you had to do to get the teleport that you wanted. It's not position, and it's not random. What else could it possibly be? Velocity of approach and look angle were our next 2 guesses. By using the same save state, I then tested looking in different directions right before the teleport. This seems to not change the teleport destinations at all, unless I looked so far in a different direction that I changed the speed of my approach to teleport locations. So look angle was ruled out. That just left velocity, and this time it seemed really to be the key. But there was one issue. Sometimes even when you reach the teleport coordinates with the same velocity, the box setting different ways would cause you to teleport to different spots. This is when we realized, it's so simple. It's the boxes. Okay, I think I might be onto something because this is the same teleport. Okay, this is a different teleport than what we were doing before. With the previous box setup, on the same angle, on the same position. The boxes that we initially thought were just to slow your movement were actually the key to the entire trick. The angle for which the boxes are facing dictate the position that you teleport to. Unfortunately, it's near impossible to navigate the boxes specifically enough to test which angles work, but by doing just the box push the same exact way every single time, you can increase the consistency of the trick by a lot. Unfortunately, this manifests the trick as being somewhat random, as the way the boxes move when you push them is not entirely skill-based. But this knowledge was incredibly useful in making the trick reliable enough to do in full game runs somewhat consistently. And because it saves so much time, we were gonna go for it even if it was random. After labbing this trick, in the next few days, Just.me would help me create a LiveSplit plugin that reads the game's in-game timer. So I would no longer have to rely on a real-time timer, it could actually compare my runs to the current records. With these new tools, this new knowledge and my running of the game, the community started to get even more alive. The moderators even decided to create a category for mouse and keyboard on speedrun.com. And hopefully, with the community giving mouse and keyboard a try, more people will give TimeSplitters Future Perfect a shot as a speedrun. Creating categories that people want to run and tools and resources for people to learn the game can make all the difference when it comes to the activity of a speedrun. And if you do enough of this all at the same time, it might even cause a speedrun revolution. This seems like the start of a speedrun revolution for TimeSplitters Future Perfect. I, for one, really like the run and want to get the world record in every individual level before going back to full game. In fact, I want to try to push the full game under 1 hour if possible. But that journey is a story for another day. Thanks so much for watching and stay stylish.